Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and it was so good while it lasted, but our time at the top is over, and now the Ds will need to fight to keep their spot in the top four with just 4 weeks to go in the season. Joining me tonight, long-time Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, everybody. Got a few technical problems running tonight, but we've also got lots of negatives to talk about, and hopefully we can find a few positives to enlighten everybody.
That's right. The technical problems, George's NBN's been a bit flaky, so I've got him on as a caller tonight, so his audio won't be as crisp as mine and our other co-host tonight, who is, of course, long-time Demonland tactician, Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. And the federal government had 3 jobs: quarantine, vaccine and the NBN, and it looks like they've failed, George, on all 3 counts.
Let's hope your vaccination works better than your NBN connection, that's for sure. All right, well, let's get stuck into it while we're here. Obviously, the match started kind of like our show started tonight, under some terrible conditions and made scoring very difficult. But I thought it was the Bulldogs who made the most of the conditions early on, being able to accurately hit the scoreboard. And then as the rain subsided and the weather improved, I thought it was also the Bulldogs who handled the conditions a lot better than we did. They weren't as fumbly as us. I think a few of our players sort of took to the conditions and would get the ball and just try and hit it, smash it forward, with a big thumping kick. Track did it, gone out of the ruck quite a few times, would grab it and just kick it. But a lot of our players just weren't adjusting to the conditions. We were fumbly, but I didn't think that they were as fumbly as us. I thought they handled it much better, and I don't think it's something you can train for necessarily, but I thought they did it better. George, what do you think?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me all right. I've just changed to a different microphone. Is that all right, Andy?
Yeah, sounds
excellent. All right, okay.
Fine.
Good. Okay. The game was certainly played under 2 different conditions. The cold front certainly hit us exactly at the when the bounce of the ball came. So I think we played the wet weather quite well in the first quarter, surprisingly, particularly Clayton Oliver had an absolute blinder. But what really was evident as the weather passed through and the ground dried out a little bit, what really became very evident was the skills of the Bulldogs, and particularly the way they handled it with what I think was superior kicking capabilities. And it was, they just took better use of what they had to operate with. I think it's easy to forget that this was a match of 1v2, and like the previous match, there wasn't going to be a great deal in it. And as we go into finals, I think it's important that this game actually gave us the opportunity to see what the failings with the side were. And I think most of those failings can be alleviated or mitigated in some way. But it would have been, now that it has been exposed, I think it would have been not the best option for us as we go into finals, having not seen really what these particular problems were, and we'll discuss them as we move through the night. We'll kick it across to Bin Man and see what his thoughts about the lovely Melbourne weather was.
Yeah, it's interesting because I tip the Ds, and I'm leading various tipping competitions that I'm in this year. So I've sort of been trying to, not tip the Ds if I don't think they're going to win. And my thinking was before the game that they would be disadvantaged by the wet conditions, because it'd make it hard for them to flick it around like they like to do and keep hold of the ball. And also they're so reliant on those sort of hit-up marks to Norton and their other tall forwards. And they went in tall with Shaki, but although he ended up playing back, which I presume was the plan all along. But so I thought actually, and, we played pretty well in the wet. We played really well in the wet against the Tigers earlier in the season. We played lots of games in the wet. So I thought that was advantage us, and it was sort of the reason I ended up tipping the Ds actually was the wet weather. But in hindsight, I was thinking I made an error of judgment because, I think there's one of the great myths of football is that wet weather is an equaliser, and I just think that's a myth. It really exacerbates poor technique, I think, and the better players, the better technique really stands out. And I thought, like George just mentioned, that was a huge factor in the end, and it really. We'll talk a bit about this tonight, but I'm positive that fatigue is playing a big factor. My theory is, as I talked about last week and the week before, is that's to do with the loading that we're doing. But, loading and fatigue also exacerbates poor technique. So for me, that was a huge issue, and the weather really played into that. Some of their kicking was just fantastic, and I think that was a big factor in them winning on Demonland. Just trying to bring up the post, but someone brought up the difference between our top 4 players and their top 4 players in terms of the disposal efficiency, and it was just chalk and cheese. And a huge difference between the two teams, and I think that was a really big factor, and that was partly condition related. I mean, Track is a star, but I think he went at 38% disposal efficiency, if my memory serves me correctly, and Bontempelli was up around 60-70%. And could you see Petrarca on his non-dominant foot nail that pass that Bontempelli did in the last? I can't. He's got a poor technique, and the weather, I think, really exacerbated that difference, compounded by the fatigue, which further messed around with our ability to hit targets and our disposal efficiency. But their top 4 is McRae, Bontempelli. I can't find the post at the moment, and who was the other one? Maybe Williams. And ours were Track. Oliver, Nibbler was in our top 4 players. And
are you talking about top disposal getters and then their disposal
I think
efficiency?
the top 4 ranked players by that disposal efficiency. So I found that their top 4 were McRae, Daniel, Smith, and Bontempelli. They're their top ranked players for the match. McRae was 71% disposal efficiency from 38 disposals. Daniel from 34 possessions at 76% disposal efficiency. Smith, 26 disposals, 65%. Bontempelli, 61% from 31. And our equivalent top 4 players, Petrarca had 31 possessions and went at 35% disposal efficiency. I guess that's handballs as well. Oliver, 38 kicks, but only at 57. Gorn, 18 kicks, 38%. And Nibbler, 25 kicks for 45%. Neil Crompton put those stats up. So thanks for that, Neil, in response to my comment about their kicking, actually. And he notes that Western Bulldogs' 4 top-ranked players had 129 disposals between them, of which 69% hit a target. Our 4 top-ranked players had 112 disposals between them, so pretty comparable, of which only 43 hit a target. So collectively, our top 4 players hit 38% of their targets, which is just appalling. And then on top of that, you add the missed shots for goals, and they took their chances. They kicked accurately and took their chances when they came. So, I think the conditions were a big factor in that, and I was kicking myself afterwards to, that I didn't tip D's based on that, because I know, I put a lot of emphasis on kicking. But if I was a Demon player and kicking myself, I would have missed me. So,
well, just between you and me and the rest of our listeners, I think even in the dry, sure, our disposal efficiency would have been up, but so would have theirs. They're a lot sharper than we are in that. I think that's probably one of our biggest failing is our disposal efficiency.
No, absolutely. Yeah. But I think that's the point around the wet weather is that, poor conditions exacerbate that gap.
I looked a little bit further at the disposal efficiency. Bin Man's gone through the top end. The bottom end is I think, far more telling. The Bulldogs only had 3 players on the field who had less than 60% disposal efficiency. That was Bruce Garcia, one of only played a handful of games, and Liberatore, who had 59.3% in any case, whereas Melbourne had 8 players below 60% disposal efficiency. That was the difference at the end of the day, and as Bin Man's already pointed out, the kicking capabilities of the Bulldogs. But when you got, from Melbourne, basically 1/3 of teams only hitting, 2/3 of the time their target, the end result was pretty damning. And the three players for the Bulldogs, well, Josh Bruce doesn't get any kicks up the field. He's kicking for goals. So if he's kicking at 60%, that's probably about okay. But it's the ones in the field that are really telling. And boy, were we a long way behind them. And the weather certainly exposed us really badly in this case.
Well, let's hope weather come finals time's a lot better in September than it is now. But all right, well, let's talk about the next thing that really did cost us dearly. I guess that's the inaccuracy once again. We were inaccurate in front of goal and mostly from set shots. It's very costly. The early misses from Ben Brown. I think Cozzy missed one. It was particularly disappointing. We talked about it last week. We talked about whether we needed forward coaches. Look, if you changed our points to goals, I don't think it would have changed the result of the match, but you nail those goals early, and I think they got 2 goals late in the quarter, and it sort of would have changed the game a bit, man.
Yeah, it's part and parcel of the same issue, isn't it? Poor technique cost us goals. It's cost us games this season. Arguably did in this game. For me, I found it a really frustrating game to watch, and we'll talk about one of the reasons next. But I felt like we were matching them, and it was a pretty level game. I actually thought we played the conditions pretty well too, George, in terms of, we clearly came in with a strategy to get it forward and to hit it along the ground and do those sorts of wet weather things. But for me, we lost the game in the first quarter. That felt like an arm wrestle in that first quarter. It felt like, if it was a boxing match, it'd be split on points. I think we were 11 points down in the end of that first quarter. Just simply didn't reflect the game. And there were 2 critical misses, Ben Brown's miss, but the one that really let the air out of the tyres a bit was the one Cozzy had. I'm pretty sure that was in the first quarter, wasn't it, where he roved it beautifully and had an open goal and missed it. And then there was another one that wasn't a missed shot as such. It was Viney, I think, had a chance to shoot, and maybe it was touched, or there was, an opportunity to score early. And I think Goodwin noted that in his presser. We just didn't take advantage of, there were 3 periods in the game where we had momentum. In the first quarter was one, in the third quarter, and a bit in the last, and we just couldn't put the score on the board. But for me, the game was lost in that first quarter when, 10 points in those conditions felt like a lot more. We've had plenty of time to bring it back, but I just thought those misses really hurt.
George?
Yeah, not really much more to add. I'm taking a lot more from the Goodwin interviews post-match. You get little snippets and insights about what he's actually thinking. You can look through all the media-type fluff that comes in them, but basically he said we were beaten in efficiency, and we've already spoken about that, and the lack of scoreboard pressure. And his simple words were, we had our chances, and when you get back to the 4 points difference in the last quarter, you come to rue those chances. You've just got to take them. As Binman said, we had 3 opportunities which were really quite clean in that first quarter, and we just blew it again, and that's been the story of the losing games that we've had this season. You just hope that players like Brown seem to be getting better, but it's just the others just aren't contributing, and we really need that to change. I don't know how it can change at this point in the season. We've talked about kicking efficiency. Kicking efficiency is also about kicking for goal as well, and this is becoming rapidly the critical factor in the losses. It's very difficult to know where we're going to go. We're certainly playing well enough. We're in the game. We had a good plan going in. We were getting the results, except in front of the goals. So hopefully we have a different story this week, but that's all we've got at the moment. Hope.
I I'd add to that. I mean, we'll talk a bit later on. I know on the run sheet there's the talk about the sort of slump and the, what the factors might be in that. And as I've said, that for me, fatigue's is the key issue. And one of the points I'd make about our accuracy is that we're not getting any goals at the moment from overlap run. It's really only Hunt and Nibbler who are providing any overlap run. And when we're up and about and we're really fresh, our scoring is generated off that run often, and we're getting our inside 50s, but it's often to a static contest. When we're running in waves and we've got multiple players, we get it forward really quickly and really fast. And we get those goals out the back, and then we can get some score, and we're running into open goals where you're not going to miss them from there. So that's a big factor in our accuracy in the last 5-6 weeks, because we're getting none of those goals. So all of our shots are under pressure. Once we're up and about and we're fresh again, our accuracy will come up, and people won't sort of realise it, but it'll be because 30% of our goals will be running into an open goal square. It's not it's not panic stations yet with that stuff.
Has that happened a lot this year? Those overlap goals?
Well, yeah,
I remember it was a factor of our 2018 year, but.
Well, I mean, you think of the 2 goals that Petrarca kicked against Port. They're the template goals. They're the ones where we win the ball with numbers. There's 3-4 players, 2-3 players either side of the ball carrier. It can go either way. It gets flicked down the field by hand, and we get players running forward of the contest. We win that, and then we get it out the back. Jackson's kicked 4 or 5 of them this year, or in fact all of his goals pretty much, bar a couple, have been exactly that sort of goal where it's got over the back. Fritter's kicked a whole bunch of them. And we get those goals when we're swarming opposition, and we're just not swarming at the moment.
Oh, well, let's get into my most disappointing part of the match, and I'll preface this by saying that the lopsided free kick count of 25-11 wasn't the sole reason for the loss, but it certainly was an extremely frustrating aspect of the match. The Bulldogs certainly had the rub of the green in this respect, and were seemingly awarded free kicks for being breathed upon, and we simply weren't afforded the same level of protection, and the protection of their forwards for free kicks in front of goals was just astounding. I just don't know how the Bulldogs keep doing this. I've watched them multiple times this season, and they continually get a blessed run by the umpires that they have a plus 80 free kick differential this season. The next side is Carlton with plus 36. That's 44 more free kicks than the next team this season. In comparison, we're at -7, particularly after this week. I think we're in the negative for the first time this year. I just wanted to officially rant about this again. I won't put that down as the reason we lost. It's certainly a factor when you add it to all the other things. And I'll add that when you get the commentators commenting on the lopsidedness without the benefit of that rabid crowd booing the umpires, then there's something definitely in it. That they really get a blessed run. I don't know how else to talk, what else to say about it, George.
Yeah, why do I always get the commentary necessary around umpires? I think it's very frustrating, isn't it? I think there's a couple of things to take away from this. Firstly, I can't find the statistics on any sort. Some of the commentators talk about it, but I can't find the stats. I'd like to know in this game, for example, how many out of bounds on the fulls we kicked. And I think the reason for that is what we've been talking about, kicking efficiency and the ability to hit targets and fatigue. I can certainly remember 4 very easy occasions that had happened, and these were unpressured kicks. It was just kicks that went straight over the boundary line when they should never have done so. So the fatigue factor, I think, is probably the major input in that, but also it's our fundamental kicking abilities, particularly with some players. I think it was highlighted in the discussion on Demonland with this. The Bulldogs have mastered the Joel Selwood elbow shoulder going up in the air as someone's tackling. I think they've got multiple players who are trained in this. You just got to look at the way that they operate when they're tackled. The old buckle at the knees trick. It's paying off for them. They're sitting so far ahead of anybody else. There's a reason. I don't know that it's because the umpires are favouring them in any way. It's because they're adopting a particular way of approaching tackling and how it's done. It just doesn't happen across so many players and across so many games against different sides without there being a fundamental reason. The fundamental reason can't be because the umpires are biased. So the good news is that going to benefit them in the end? It may. Some people say that it certainly did in 2016. There's probably evidence for that. But just as equally, Richmond have been at the bottom of the umpires' favouritism for the last 4 to 5 years, and they've managed to win 3 flags in the meantime. So we can't do anything about it. We can't complain, but we've got to be aware of it in the future. The way we approach the way we approach the Bulldogs players, you've got to tackle them in a different way, and that's the jobs of coaches to address that problem during the training sessions during the week.
It was appalling, the umpiring. That game, that was really the big driver for why I was so frustrated. I've been pretty, not been getting wound up watching the footy this year, and even when we played poorly. And but I don't think I can recall a game that was umpired so poorly. And the thing that fans hate and I hate is inconsistency. There's been a lot of games that even this season where the umpiring's been poor, but that was appalling. And I don't, what reasons, excuse, I don't care. It was a factor in the result of the game. Now, of course, umpires are always going to play some sort of role in the game, and we're in a position to be able to win them. It's neither here nor there, that discussion whether they factored in. That, as we talk about after the Adelaide game, it's just simply not good enough to have $1 billion competition and have umpires who aren't up to the standard that's required. It's I could not believe in the last quarter. I heard that they've got the umpires mic'd up at the moment. You can hear everyone, and one of the Dogs players seriously calling for a throw against Hibbert. I almost jumped through the screen to throttle him if I could have. It was crazy, and I think that at halftime the free kicks were 11-4. We got our 4th free kick deep in our defence. Nothing free kick. We couldn't do anything with it with about 15 or 20 seconds to go. So ostensibly it was 11-3 at that point. We were 21 points down at halftime, and no one's telling me that a big factor in that wasn't free kicks in a game that was particularly wet. It got drier afterwards, but it was wet in that first half. So it rained pretty heavily in the first quarter. It was still slippery on the ground in the second quarter. It was a bit better in the second half, but still slippery. So in those conditions, territory is huge. It's absolutely a massive factor. They had the opportunities 11 times to progress the ball from a stoppage. I mean, that's a huge, pardon the pun, free kick to them. And I think that for me, that the thing that upsets me the most is the ones that don't get paid. And was continually blocked. There was a mark where Norton got a mark, maybe it was in the third quarter. It was a good mark. But Petty was completely blocked from running in at the contest. And Gawn gets blocked every time there's a contest.
And held. He was also held quite a bit at ruck contest.
Held, hit in the head. What another thing that really frustrates me is there is clearly an AFL directive for the media not to say anything, because how Goodwin wasn't asked about the 11-4 differential at half time, and what was it at the end? What was it?
25-11.
25-11, and we got junk time freeze at the end. They must have a directive. You'll lose your pass if you ask about umpiring. It's complete. But I mean, why are they not held to? I'm not. Again, we talked about this earlier in the season. If they're not trained, that's the AFL's fault. I'm not criticising the individual umpires. I'm saying it's their job to ensure that the officiating is at the highest possible standard. It's $1 billion game. There's a lot riding on it for all concerned. It's not amateur footy, and it's amateur umpiring. And I'm sick of games that Melbourne are involved in, where whether it's a factor in the win or the loss, where it changes the game. And I was furious. I just could not be more furious watching it, and it was making me even more furious, the lack of critique from the commentators. And the amount of times they throw the ball. I know that it must be hard on the inside. Well, then they change the bloody rule so the boundary line umpire can call it, because that's where they throw on the Footscray. The Bulldogs, they throw on that boundary line side. They must have done it 10 times during the match, and the camera's on that side so you can see it, or on the wing side, on the MCC side, so you can see it. They've got to address it. You can either throw or you can't throw, and they're doing it 10, 15 times a game. So, as I said, I couldn't believe the calls from the Dogs for a free, and they're starting to frustrate me, that team, because they're a bunch of whingers as well.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, George.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to pick up Bin Man's point about professionalism. I think it's very easy to get an umpire onto the field when they don't make decisions. And that's certainly been the case. And there's a number of particular umpires that I've watched in the last couple of years. You just know they're going to call play on, because they don't make a mistake when they call play on. They're not actually umpiring, but they don't make a mistake, and they're afraid of making a mistake because they get penalised for it in the media. But all you finish up with is a whole stack of, which is what we've got exactly, amateurs who actually don't umpire. And it's frustrating, and you've got to give credit to the Bulldogs. They're throwing the ball, they're getting away with it. They'll keep doing it because the umpires won't call it. Hawthorn went in their premiership years were doing exactly the same sort of thing. They would push people. They would throw the ball out. Remember the John Plattons, how the ball always seemed to manage to come out from underneath the packs when he was on the bottom of it. They get away with it because the umpires just don't call it. It's a sad indictment, like Bin Man said. You've got a $1 billion industry, and you've got semi-professionals or part-timers operating in this sphere, and it really takes away the whole ethos of the game and the way it should be played. So, yeah, we can get frustrated with it, but we're stuck with it at the moment. Once again, we have to learn to cope with it and do something about it, take advantage of it. We should start throwing the ball. So.
Well, but there were two in particular. I mean, the thing that was frustrating for me is it took part of the enjoyment away for me. But there were two incidents that really jumped out. One was the free kick against Hunt that was paid down the ground. And okay, it was probably there when I first looked on it, saw it live. One where I forget the player he chased down.
It was on the boundary line.
Yeah. So it was. Initially I thought, oh no, Hunt, what are you doing? And then on the replay, he did get him high, but he got him high as he was releasing it. So one, it should have been there. It should have been at the point. And then the game stopped. And they paid it downfield, and basically no one knew what was going on because the assumption was it was going to go back to the player in the wing, and they called advantage, and they walked in to get a goal in those conditions. It was just an appalling, decision to allow that to be an advantage, because it's such a stupid rule. It just, it's ridiculous, complete roulette. But the ball should have come back to the wing. That was one. The second one was, and it ended up costing us a goal, was Oliver got hit flush in the head, bending down to pick up the ball, got hit in the head. He come up like, I don't know, he must have a hard head, that kid, because he was down for a while and he got up rubbing his head. They won that stoppage. He should have got the free, and less than 30 seconds later, they kicked a goal. There's two goals right there. It's just not good enough.
Bulldogs, thanks to Junior Mac on Demonland for these stats. Bulldogs have been blessed the last 7 years from 2014 to current day. They've had a plus 426 free kick differential in their favour. Every year they've had more free kicks for than against. And in particular, their finals run in 2016 when they won the flag, they had a plus 31 free kick differential, 79 to 48. Yep, they are blessed. I'd love to have, I'm not saying there's anything untoward going on there, but I'd love to have an umpiring statistic like that and wouldn't have these frustrations each week when talking about the umpiring. Although I think we've had it good this year up until this week, but yeah, certainly frustrating. Let's move on. I know it's frustrating, but let's go to the next frustrating bit. Hit-outs and clearances. We know the Bulldogs are a fantastic clearance side, having a plethora of players that can get the ball in and under and also receive it on the outside. The thing that irks me is that we absolutely dominated the hit-outs. We won the centre clearances, but where we were really hurt was around the ground for the stoppage clearances, and more importantly, they got at least 2 goals directly in their forward line for us not manning up well enough deep in defence, sort of leaving the best player, Bontempelli, just all on his lonesome just to get the ball and easily kick a snap goal. Not good enough. Bin Man, we'll talk about some hit-outs, some stoppages.
Really, the stoppages was the 6 goals they got from clearances inside their 50. That was a big number, wasn't it? So that was the game, actually. The first one of those that you mentioned, Andy, that Bontempelli got was an appalling bit of defence by Salem, which you could see on the replay. Yeah. It was just he was on the wrong side of him. I mean, he had to be on the other side of him just to be goal side. For one reason, you always go goal side of your opposition player, although maybe there was a handoff problem. Should have been Harms, or
it probably wasn't his man, but yeah,
maybe.
Yeah. It was Harms who was the problem.
Yeah, right, okay. And then there was another one where Viney didn't, a similar thing, but on that, when Salem did work it out, to allow a left footer of his ability to have the thing, that was appalling. But it was really interesting that Goody saying that was a complete anomaly. The 6 goals, the average is 1 or 2, I think he said in the presser. It was a really interesting presser, as you alluded to before, George. And 6 is just crazy down, isn't it, in terms of giving it in the wet, in the low. Well, actually, it wasn't that low scoring in terms of, they ended up getting mid-70s. So, but to give up 6 goals inside 50. Pointed to 2 things for me is that one of our biggest issues is we've never really replaced Jeddah. We really miss that medium small defender, to man up for those sorts of contests and to take the mediums. So I think that's one. 2, I think, I don't want to, keep bringing everything back to fatigue and this issue about loading and, but for me, it sort of speaks to, it also impacts on mental, how mentally switched on you are, but there was definitely a failing. The other one I think is Hibberd has been a bit sort of off in the last couple of games as well. 6 inside 50 clearances for me was almost the ball game. Around the grounds, the issue is again around the fatigue, because we're still, I can't see properly, but I'm assuming that we're still allowing the opposition to have an extra and our extras back. So that means that if, it makes sense if we're fatigued and they've got an excellent midfield that they're going to do pretty well. As you said, Andy, we broke even in the mid, in the centre. We just couldn't take any advantage of our inside 50s from them. And they gave us a bit of a touch-up around the ground. But again, even Goody mentioned that he wasn't too concerned about that. It was really the 6 goals they got inside 50 from clearances was really the game, wasn't it?
Well, On the Couch had that stat, the points conceded from defensive 50 stoppages since round 13 is 74 points, which is 18th in the league. So that's not good. And that's a big problem for us.
Can I ask Andy about that stat? I saw that, and then I get confused a bit sometimes with is 18th bad or
no, I think
on some of the stats. The points conceded from all other stoppages is 2nd. So is that meaning that that's a really strong stat then, isn't it?
Well, you would think so. It sounds like that first one, the points conceded from defensive stoppages, 18, that sounds like we're the worst. We're conceding a lot of goals from stoppages in defensive 50, that's right. Around the ground, not so much. So I would have thought that was also bad since round 13, but obviously not based on that stat. So I don't know.
It's interesting. Again, that sort of again, that's one of my frustrations about stats like that is that I didn't actually watch on the couch, so I just seen the stat that you put up with those numbers. But what's the context for that? What was round 1 to 13? Where were we? And if Goody reckons that the average is only 1.5 a game, so if it's only 1.5 goals a game, it doesn't really matter if you're 9th or 18th, does it?
Yeah, but they put up some other stats where they compared round 1 to 12 and then 13 to round 19. So clearance differential, we went round 1 to 12, we went from 8th in the league to 15th. Scores from clearances against, we went from 2nd to 7th. Ball movement, that's some of those things haven't changed. But the accuracy was 13th to 18th, so we were bad in the first part and we're even worse now. But yeah, I don't have any other context around that. George, anything else you want to add to the,
Yeah, I think we need to go back to... Yeah, I think we need to go back to exactly what Goody was complaining about or highlighted about the 6 goals from the Dogs forward 50. Who's meant to be it's around stoppages. The goals that they're getting are coming from their mids. That we saw the Bontempellis getting it. We saw McRae's. We even saw a few of their half-backs getting goals, for crying out loud. Where are our mids? You can't point at people like Salem or even Hibbert in this situation. They've already got someone else that they're defending. It's our mids who are falling down. And the second point is, and we'll talk about this a bit later on, is that our mids aren't hitting the goals. They got 4 goals from their mids in this game. We only got 2 early on from Petrarca and Viney. Last week against the Hawks, it was 5-1. They're just not doing the work that they need to do in the forward line and defensively in the forward line. You can't say just because it's in defence that the defence is responsible for this. And Binman talked about that goal of Bontempelli's. I'd invite people to go back and have a look at where James Harms is standing. He's standing alongside the boundary line, for crying out loud, while Bontempelli's goal side, so fault number 1, the ball went from Garcia to Liberatore out to Bontempelli, and Harms was still standing on the goal line, on the boundary line. It was just incredible. The lack of football IQ in that particular case, but it's not just him. Where are the Olivers and Petrarcas in that situation? They just don't seem to be around. So again, they need to be able to do the same amount of work as what the Bulldogs mids are doing right around the ground, not just in the middle. Everybody gets really excited, and we'll talk a bit more about the mids. Everybody gets really excited about the numbers that the mids produce, but it's actually the real numbers at the pointy end of the ground is what changes the game.
And added to that, George, the goals that did McRae get a goal? I don't think he got a goal, did he? But the Bontempelli, 2 beautiful goals, but both of them created 2 fantastic goals. One was the dagger that was just a gorgeous kick from Bontempelli on his right. The other one was that just jumped off. All praise to those 2 fellas. But McRae, he is just a magician with a footy. He had a left foot kick where I'm not sure whether he was always intending to make the kick and he was just trying to allow the forward to get some space, or it was a late decision. But either way, he kicked it across his body, jagged it sort of on almost right angles into the pocket, which set up one of their goals. I can't recall if it was in the first quarter, but it was a really critical time. It might have been in the first quarter. It was just the vision to see it, but the vision's one part. It's being able to execute that kick under pressure in the wet conditions. It was just fantastic. And that fella, he got 38 possessions, and he hurts you with them.
Yeah, that was, I think it was a late decision, but it was a beautifully executed kick that he meant every bit of it. At first I thought, that's just gone off the side of, not off the side of his boot, but he's just been lucky. But it wasn't luck. It was absolutely, when I looked at it again, he meant every bit of it.
And to George's point, where's Track doing that and Oliver doing that? You know, where Viney actually, credit to Viney, did a beautiful bit of play where he pulled it into the corridor to set up. Was it Cozzy?
Cozzy, yeah.
You know, that was fantastic bit of footy. So you're right, George. They've got to be hitting the scoreboard. They've also got to be creating. To be fair to Track, I mean, I think he's number 1 or 2 in the league in score involvement. So it's not as if he's been, he's poor in that area. But on the night, he didn't really create much scoring opportunities. And, their 2 big guns really were just magnificent.
Oh, well, George, we can talk about the midfield now. We racked up some possessions. We had the 38 to Oliver, 31 to Petrarca, and add to Viney's 19. But certainly no match to Bontempelli, McRae and Libba, 31, 38 and 27 possessions. And we talked about earlier the disposal efficiency, or their disposal efficiency compared to ours is just off the charts. So I don't think, we can't compare there. But anything else you want to add about the midfield numbers?
No. I think and this is the trouble with stats. You just look at stats and you go, what a great game, and probably was, because you've got 3 midfielders from either team sort of totaling about 90 possessions each for each midfield, so creates a great spectacle. But the reality is, winning the game is what they do with those very possessions and the quality of them. We've talked about the disposal efficiency. And you can't fault what we've got in terms of the mids, but it's the lack of output. Like I said, two goals in this game, 1 goal in the previous game. But it's not only our traditional mids. Max in this game as a ruckman, 52 hitouts he had, something ridiculous. Yeah, he took 2 marks for the game. Neither of which was contested. And while it was wet for the majority of the game, it did dry out. But Max has been on this downward spiral with his marking for the last couple of weeks. So his marking is critical, particularly to the way we move the ball out of the back line from kick-ins. They almost invariably kick it towards Max. When he's not marking it, the ball comes to ground, and we saw what happened the previous week against Hawthorn. When the ball comes to ground, they swarm on it and it's gone. This week we had the same thing happening to us again. So Max, again, it's probably the fatigue factor, but he's certainly not producing the same sort of outcomes that we need from the mids. Harms, unfortunately, I thought, was a dead anchor for the whole game. He certainly didn't stop Libra. We'll talk about that.
We may as well talk about it now. I mean, last time we played him, Harms did a fantastic job of curbing the influence of Libba, the contest, and he also had a pretty good night himself that night, getting his own ball, but not so much this week.
Yeah, and I think the problem was he actually didn't play the same way that he played Libba the last time. The last time was to force Libba to the outside. Libba's inside. So in order to force him out, you've got to go in yourself. And in this game, Harms stood back. And I can recall 3 or 4 circumstances where he was on the wrong side of the centre circle, where he was on the wrong side of the stoppage, and all he could do was watch either McRae, Bontempelli running away, because Liberatore's managed to get the ball out to them yet again. He had 7 tackles, I think, whereas in the previous game I think he might have had 10 and above. But the other difficulty is when he's in there, we're actually 1 quality mid down. Viney replaced him certainly in the last quarter, and that was confirmed from Goodwin's presser. I think he was replaced at halftime. He just wasn't doing the job. So we were playing with 2 mids for most of the game in terms of being able to get the ball out, and he wasn't doing the tagging that was required. So it's not surprising that the mid situation wasn't certainly in our favour, and these little things cost us in the end.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a fantastic midfield, and I mean that is ours drops away after Oliver and track really, and particularly when Harms is not at his best. And you've touched on it a couple of times, George, tonight, but also over the journey. Hasn't got the highest football IQ, Harms, and often it sort of gets exposed. But it's really curious that I don't think they did put a hard tag on Libba this time. I'm pretty sure they didn't. I mean, they went to contests and they split it a bit. Viney went to him in the last a bit. But I feel like that, that Goody kept a lot of cards to his chest and elected not to play some. So, there's no way that they're not going to run someone with, say, Daniel, or at least have a defensive forward on him and take out his influence come finals. And, that even looked to, shut down McRae. I think that, he was being pretty canny, Goody. So, at this stage of the season, you don't show all your cards, do you? And one of them was not tagging, putting a hard tag on Libba. So, he wasn't particularly influential, was he, Liberatore? I didn't think. I mean, the three most influential players for them, I thought, were the three fellas that I mentioned, Bontempelli, McRae and Daniels. There'll be a different look come finals time, the way they match them up. But, it just makes me think about Harms is that, if he's in there, he really has to be doing a good tagging job, I reckon. It just makes me think that that's where Melksham comes back into the frame come finals time.
WA Demon Boy in the chat room has said, and if you'd like to join us in the chat room, demonland.com/podcast, if you're listening to this live, watching the Dogs midfield, McRae, Smith, Bont, Hunter, Libba, plus Treloar and Dunkley, who were missing this week, versus ours in track, Viney, Oliver and Harms, Jordan. I just can't see us beating them with a full team. This is WA Demon Boy saying. What do you guys think? We may have to come up against them again if we want to. Well, certainly if we want to go deep into finals, we will face them at some point, you'd think. How do you think we'll stack up to them next time? Maybe perhaps on a drier deck?
Look, I'm fully confident. I think that our system stacks up super well against them. As I said, there's no way they're letting those sort of numbers, particularly Daniels. Terence Langley in the chat room notes that Max talked about Liberatore taking Harms to the passive side of the contest on the radio this morning on RSN, and opening up the opportunity presumably for McRae and the others to get the ball. Well, Goody will respond to that. So, I think that the early season game is the one to look at in terms of that. I think that we performed really well, easily could have won that game. It doesn't knock my confidence at all. They're an excellent footy team. There's no question. They're skilled. They've got talent. But, I'll back our system to beat their system. And in order for our system, we need to be at our optimal fitness levels and freshness and have that swarm. If we're not swarming, we're not winning. So, but if we can get that swarm back, that whole running in waves and stopping them, then I'm really confident that we can knock them off come finals.
George, I'll get your take in a second. If someone just tried to call us through Skype, we're not taking calls tonight because I got George on the phone. It'll most likely kick him off, and we don't want to do that. So apologies for that. We'll be back taking calls next week. George, do you want to add anything to that talk about facing up against the Bulldogs at some point in the pointy end of the season?
Yeah, I think that's going to happen. Everybody knows that's going to happen. I think it comes back to the midfield, not in terms of does our midfield match their midfield, because I think they have got. I do think they've got a superior midfield. It's how our midfield works in our system, and we've got a completely different system to them. And like we saw in that first game, our system beat theirs in this particular game. I think our mids let us down more than what people recognise. And if that changes, when we, as Binman said, we get back to that swarming factor, we've got the Hunts coming off the half-back line, we've got Salem delivering the ball off that half-back line, but they've got to deliver it to the mids. and the mids aren't holding up at the moment, moving that ball forward like they were in the earlier part of the season. So if that comes back, our system will beat theirs. But if we let it run like it did in this game, theirs will beat ours.
It's interesting, Terence Lee, I'm not sure where you got the stat from, maybe you can put in the chat room, but that Bulldogs had 6 at the contest against our 4. I didn't notice that on the night, but we always have 1 less. Bulldogs always bring an extra to the contest. So that would explain, that's why it's so hard to win those stoppages around the ground against them. They've got an extra at the contest. So if they had 6 to 4, well, that would have, advantaged them on that. There was just on that swarm factor, there was an article that you put up on Demonland, Andy, about the what's the title of the article? The facing their demons. What's behind Melbourne's form slump, which was a pretty nothing article by Callum Toomey, I have to say. Just put a bunch of stats up with no real sort of interpretation or analysis of them. But one of the stats that I thought was really interesting was, and it relates to the sort of the way that that thing about the way we like to run in waves and swarm oppositions when we're really up and about, and we crack open teams forward of the ball. That's a big driver of our scoring. It was in the first round 1 to 12, 58% boundary from defensive 50. So presumably that's meanings that I'm not sure how narrow it is, the band, but that when we're exiting and transitioning from our defensive 50, 58% of the time, we do so along the boundary, which is number 2 in the AFL. Rounds 13 to 19, it's down to 48.4%, and now we've dropped to 14th rank, which I found a really interesting stat because what it suggests to me is that we're playing a lot more static footy, a lot more kicking to contest, and where, when you're running in waves, we do so. We've talked about it earlier in the season. Remember, those little handballs require 3-4 players all to be in that chain, all to be there to win the spillage or to be there for the handball over the top, all running ahead of the ball or in waves ahead of it. That's just not there at the moment. As I said earlier, it's only Nibbler and Hunt who are getting any sort of run and overlap option. There's nothing else. So, which probably explains sort of a curious stat about the sort of we're going more corridor. That's because there's not the options to sort of run it. Once we got that back, we'll be much more aggressive in our ball movement. But someone like Rivers is a good example. He's just out on his feet, so he's not there to provide that handball option or the run. You take a mark and you've immediately got a player running past. So that if you don't, you've got to go back over the mark, stop, drive it, go down more on towards the corridor, which probably explains that stat. And interesting, Andy, and the stats that you're talking from on the couch, ball movement was 7th round 1 to 12 and round 13 to 19 first. And I wonder whether that's similar, related to the same issue, although I'm not quite sure what ball movement means.
But
explain it.
Even if that's good, this ball movement thing, you then have a look at the points for these points for. We were ranked 4th, 90.6, and now we're ranked 14th, 69.3. Now, you said that all this article is doing is throwing up some stats, and it's a nothing article. Yeah, sure, they're not. They're just looking at, I guess, the symptoms, but not the cause. Yeah, exactly. I guess. But I guess that's probably for us to sort of deep dive into it. But these statistics are damning. Scores from turnover, we were ranked 1. We're now ranked 12. Clearance differential 8 to 15. We've gone from 8th to 15th. That your boundary one. The kicks inside 50. Retention rate 4th to 11th. Goals shot actually 13th to 18th. We talked about that before. Goals per inside 50, 7 to 17th. Something's gone wrong in the last. What's happened in the last 6 weeks? And you said we'll get it back at some point. Well, will we get it back?
Well, what's gone wrong? I mean, that's my frustration. So that article is so typical of the way the game's discussed in the media. So where's the explanation from that for him? Now,
well, he hasn't.
Of course, exactly. Of course, you can make a guess. You don't know. And my guess is, as I've been saying for weeks now, it's to do with the loading. All teams load at this time of year. Or it's Engorged Onion's been posting about this on Demonland. Is that this is a thing that's happened in footy for 20 years. They've perfected it. Every single team loads up at this time of the year. And every year it's like a collective amnesia in the football world. Everyone goes, oh, it's August, it's July. Why is the scoring, George talked about it last week, scoring has fallen off a cliff. It was averaging 170 points per game, total match point from round ones to about round 10. Since then, it's dropped down to 150. It is complete. All teams are playing rubbish. Only Geelong of the top teams have avoided an upset. There's been multiple upsets. 2 weeks ago, people, a good tipping round, I went up in my tipping competition, tipping 4. So it happens every time in the year. We've got a young team playing a ballistic style. They're loading up. Unlike other teams where we're keeping them playing, and one of the things about Goody, he gets criticised for being stubborn. Another way of looking at that is that he's confident in the system. So we're not changing our system. We're not bringing an extra up to the contest. We're backing our system in, and it's a calculated gamble in doing so. We've talked. George has raised it a number of times through the year about our use of time on ground. Our young players are only playing 55%. Jordan only played 55% game time. Cozzy, Jackson, they're resting them in the game rather than taking them off for a week or two break. For me, that's the explanation, Andy. So all those stats that you just read out, let's say clearance differential. We were 8th. That's because we're up and about. We were winning those one-on-one contests. We had one less at the contest, but we were so strong. We were winning them. Now we're 15th because we're fatigued. We're going less boundary because, as I said, we're not running in waves. Our shot to goal accuracy can be explained by we're not getting those goals that I talked about before where we're walking into an open goal, and so that obviously jumps up our accuracy. So I think that is the biggest factor. The question is whether we're able to get back to a freshness. But again, with that collective amnesia, people sort of don't even think back to 2018. That whole discussion was 2018 an outlier. It's a really weird thing that we do in footy. Well, it's not an outlier. It's part of the journey to get where we are now. And in 2018, you'll remember we hit our straps. When we played Geelong, we swarmed Geelong in that first final. They had no answer. We ran over the top of them. Same with Hawthorn the next week. Why would it be any different this year? Obviously, it's a gamble. Teams don't win premierships finishing top of the ladder. None have in the last 13 years except for Hawthorn back in 2013. We talked about that last week as well. Why would it be any different this year? They're not aiming to peak every game. They're aiming to peak in September. The gamble is falling out of the top 4.
Well, that's
the gamble they're taking.
That was my next thing, where we could cost ourselves a top 4, which sort of lessens our chances. For me, I want to finish top 4 and I want to win that first final. I want to get a home final. Don't want to have to go through any interstate teams. The good thing is that it might look like Bulldogs and Geelong will finish top 2. That can help us, but yeah.
One of the other stats from, sorry, George, just quickly, the on the couch stats that you were mentioning, Andy, was shots at goal. Round 1 to 12, we were second at shots to goal. We're third. So, that doesn't speak to a massive, massive collapse, does it?
No. And I'm not saying...
So we're still getting our looks, and we've talked about it before. With a touch better accuracy, we could have won 2 of these games. So, yes, it's a gamble. Hopefully we don't finish out if we don't finish top 4, it's a gamble that's not paid off. But they would say possibly, well, if we kept pushing through to win these games and run out of gas, that's worse than finishing 5th.
Star of the 80s in the chat room. I think the drop-off in form of Salem, Langdon, T-Mac since round 12 has had a large impact on our team's performances. They were all in the All-Australian form and have dropped off since the bye. Well, T-Mac's sort of up and down. There's some weeks he's in, others he's not. Langdon, I think since the concussion, really hasn't done much. And Salem, I think since his start to the year, he had that injury, and I think he's only played one one and a half good games since then. So, yeah, I tend to agree with those three players. Their form has definitely dropped off.
And sorry, George, just one more point on there was you can see the players it's affecting. So all those players that were just mentioned from Star of the 80s, Langdon of those ones, you can see he is not running as fast as he was. And there was a play where you'll remember it, the one that Cozzy got that goal. Langdon, the first 4 or 5 matches of the season, he would have not needed to have handballed that to Cozzy. He was running up and down on the spot going to, he's a relatively quick player, but he is clearly fatigued. And
the conditions as well.
The Bulldogs player tracked him down.
That's true.
And the conditions. In the chat room, Engorged Onion was asked about when it drops off. The volume and intensity decreases, and Engorged Onion said that it's about a month before finals, which would make sense, wouldn't it? And that he also notes the challenge of not having the VFL team operating.
It's massive.
That creates challenges in getting your loading across all your teams. So.
The other thing, Andy, about those identified players, Langdon, Salem and T-Mac, is that they're all heavy runners up and down the ground, and the fatigue factor is certainly coming in. But also, particularly in this game, the Bulldogs had a very definite plan. Do not kick the ball down the Langdon wing. Keep it away from him.
They're all the teams are doing that. They've all worked that out.
Well, they probably will, but the Bulldogs were able to execute it properly. I mean, Johannesson, who's just as equally a great runner, he had the grand total of 9 possessions for the game, and he was on Langdon. They were keeping the ball away from that side of the ground, so they're seeing an advantage in that. So it's not surprising that some of these players' stats are dropping. I suspect the same sort of thing about Salem, just a tight, hard tag on Salem because he delivers the ball so beautifully up the ground. The opposition aren't silly. They're going to put work into the factors that enable us to move the ball forward quickly and efficiently. The fact that Binman alluded to before, that we were using the corridor a lot more, it's because I suspect we were forced to. When Hunt comes running out of the back line, he's looking for someone to pass it to, and in the first part of the season it was get it out to someone like a Langdon or a Salem, or moving up the ground, or one of the mids who we've talked about not being there at the moment. He had to go on a couple of occasions when he went on a couple of his runs. He had to go basically 3/4 of the length of the ground because he had no one to pass it to. So, we'll get back to it, but we've got to be aware that this is what's going to happen. Opposition coaches aren't totally silly. We saw earlier on in the season the work that was being put into Oliver to alleviate his influence in the game. These other players have got to do the same sort of thing. You're going to get the pressure if you're good.
Yeah, the other factor too about fatigue is that across the AFL, every team is struggling. As George pointed out last week, the standard of footy's been woeful for the last few weeks. But some teams are going to get impacted more than others, and we're one of them because of our style. Our system relies on a level of intensity that has to be brought, a level of ability to run in waves. Our way of scoring is related to that. So, one of the stats in that article that I was mentioning before, Andy, was the kick inside 50 retention rate. We were 4th in the AFL round 1s to 12 in the last 5 games where we've dropped down to 11th. Again, that's all about that pressure. We're not, our tackling inside 50s have fallen off a cliff because we're not holding that ball in. So that means that there's someone like Salem who, when we're on, he's pressing up high, so he's not getting he's getting a third of his kicks forward of centre. That means he's super dangerous. If he's getting all his kicks at halfback flank, and as George notes, they're doubling down and they're tagging him, well, he's going to have less influence on the game. But they're all sort of tied. The other factor is that we've got 5 players under 21 who are in our best 22 who they've decided not to rest. Now, that's obviously a philosophical decision. You've got to back Burgess in. He's supposed to be one of the best elite performance managers in the world. So everyone thinks he's a genius round 1 to 9. Well, he's no less a genius now. So let's be confident that he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, but that whole point about Engorged Onion in the chat room, He said someone posted about the Burgess Factor report and the expectation from those supporters that we would drop off. Well, that loading is certainly having an effect. Can we come back from that? I don't know.
But that's the... Well, why would you not have faith in Burgess? He's got a full list, no injuries. He's a gun at what he does. You know, you'd expect that there'd be no reason why we wouldn't. As Ngorjan point out on Demonland, every club does this and has done for probably 25 years, longer potentially of some level, but certainly in the last 10 to 15 years at a scientific, level that's probably to the minute. But 5 young players who are Petty, Cozzy, Jackson, Rivers, and who's the fifth at Jordan, who are in our best 22 and all play critical roles, all spread out in different positions on across the ground. And so, they're playing 55% game time. That'll go up to 70%, 80%. It'd be like having new players come finals. You can see Jackson, he's just struggling. So, let's expect that they will, that Burgess knows what he's doing. I think that's a fair assumption, and they'll be fresher and running. So those sorts of complications. If you compare us to a Geelong, I don't know if you've watched Geelong in the last couple of weeks, they spend half the game chipping it around their back line. It's nowhere near as taxing as the way we play. So they can take their bloody load management by spending a third of the time of the whole game against Freo. They literally spent probably a third of the game kicking it back and forward across the half-back flank, not expending a penny. So, different clubs are going to get impacted by this differently. Dogs, be interested to know there. I mean, they seem pretty fresh, so they have a similar ballistic style, don't they? So,
another big area where we seem to fall down was across our half-forward line. A lack of pressure and accountability sort of allowed Caleb Daniel to... I mean, he was constantly left alone. He racked up 34 touches, and we know how damaging his possessions can be. I also thought we seemed to be kicking it down the throat of Jurea. He had 17 disposals. Bailey Dale racked up 24 possessions of his own across half-back. Just didn't seem to have that pressure that we've seen in the early part of the year in that respect. And I'm sure you will tell me that's because we're cooked at the moment. It's the loading. It's costing us. We're certainly not seeing that tackling pressure, that ability to keep it in our forward line that we saw early on in the year.
Yeah, it's been. I thought Spargo had his worst game for a long time, didn't he? And he wasn't applying anywhere near the sort of normal pressure. I don't know, George. It felt like they were running someone on Spargo as well.
I don't know. I didn't see enough on the television. I didn't see anybody doing any work, Neil Bullen included, on these 3 players. It wasn't only the possessions that they got. Dale had 20 kicks out of his 24 disposals. Daniel had 17. Duray, who I have no time for as a player, he is a brilliant kick. The result was those 3 alone had 75 disposals in the games, of which 50 were kicks. And the worst part that we were talking about before, the most efficient kicking, they had Dale had 70% disposal efficiency with his kicks, Daniel 76%, and Duray 88%. There was just no evidence of any pressure coming from the half forwards, and who's playing on the half forward line. You've got to do more than just run around in circles, putting pressure on people, but not actually stopping them. This was critical, and what's worse, this is the way the Bulldogs operate. They want those half-backers to be able to move the ball through the ground. In this case, I think they changed their game plan. Normally, they'd be running much further up the ground and carrying the ball, particularly to their outsiders. This time, they were kicking it to the next person up the line, particularly their mids. But we just can't afford to. When we play them again, you learn the lesson that you just can't leave people like Caleb Daniel alone. You've got to stick someone on him. Just stick someone on him. You sacrifice someone, but you've got to stick someone on him. In the first game that we played them, we pressured them constantly. Daniel couldn't switch the ball. He couldn't move it sideways. He couldn't deliver it. Once they have the capability to deliver it, they really hurt you, and they did in this game again. So hopefully we've learned from that, and it won't happen again.
But, at the very real risk of belabouring the point, I think that's exactly right. It's a great comparison between that first game we played against them and this game, and the difference was the pressure we applied to the ball carrier. Their percentages, I don't know, I can't recall obviously, but they won't have been getting 75% disposal efficiency against us in that game, and it makes sense if we are fatigued for whatever reason. Let's take the reason off the table, loading or not. Doesn't really matter whether it's loading. Everyone can see that we're fatigued. It's not, it's evident. So let's leave the reason aside. If you aren't fully fit and fresh, you aren't going to be able to apply the sort of pressure. And if any team can't apply the sort of pressure that you need to against the Dogs, because they are such good kicks, and they've got a system where they know a strong system, they know where everyone's going to be on the ground, they'll cut up any team. That's why, getting back to WA Demons boys' comment, that's why I'm so confident, come the finals, because I am confident that we'll be up and running over the top of the ground. And just like we did earlier in the season, our pressure will be too much for them to be hitting those targets. And Giorgio, there's just no chance. That's what I meant by one of the Goody not playing all his cards. He'll man up. He'll put someone on Daniels. He's not going to allow him easy kicks over the half back line. So, and there'll be a bunch of other changes too, and they'll start doing, maybe one or two tactical changes or set plays that they'll introduce come finals. Nothing, nothing shocking, but he's very much focused on, as we talked about last week, the finals being a new season essentially. So, comes spring at the MCG with 12,000 people. It's a different kettle of fish. And as I say, there's no way they'll, let Daniel run around kicking the ball. But he's another beautiful kick, isn't he?
Yeah, well, 70% in this case, but it's not just his kicking; he delivers by hand as well. So, he's quite remarkable. There's not too many teams have a centre half back that's about 1 metre tall. So, he's a brilliant player, brilliant IQ, football IQ, and uses the ball brilliantly. But you're right. These are the very obvious things that we are able to take away from this game. The Bulldogs are the standard. I don't think Geelong are. They're coasting along very nicely. They've got a great draw. The Bulldogs are the real standard, I think, in this particular season, and it showed us what we need to do and what areas that we need to concentrate in order to beat them. And this was just another example. Like you said, you don't leave Caleb Daniel alone, unattended on the half-back line. It just won't happen the next time around.
Yeah, I agree.
With about 9 minutes to go, we seem to have all the momentum in the match. We narrowed the 14-point three-quarter time margin to 4 points after goals to Brown and Fritsch. What happened after that? We just succumbed.
I mean, I guess one of the frustrations of the game, and for all Demons fans, is I thought we played well in the game. I thought it was a really good effort. I'm sick of playing games in wet weather. It's incredible how many games the D's have had in wet, slippery conditions this season. So, I wasn't unhappy with our performance at all, really, but it really highlighted the losses against Collingwood and GWS, didn't it, in the draw? Like, it sort of threw them up in relief, if you like, and, made those losses retrospectively feel worse because if we'd got over the line. But, I have to say in that last, you've got to just give them credit. Bontempelli was magnificent in those last few minutes. And I mean, he is a star. And, the second goal, he got a clearance goal in that, didn't he? And then the next one was the pass out of the centre. The clearance was a bad bit of defence by us. So, I think that, it was ironic that was a big factor given we'd given 5 up previous to that. But then that kick to the leading forward was just...
Ugle-Hagan, yeah.
Ugle-Hagan, right. It was just on his right foot, just a bullet. And good on the young fella for going, well, not for us, but, well done for him to going back. So, their class really showed. It just showed that, 21 points down in any game of footy, and particularly in those conditions at halftime, it's a hard road to get back from. And statistically, you probably only win, you do well to win 70 to 80% if you get down 4 goals at any point in a match.
The other thing I had down here was about our game time, which we've pretty much talked about. And George, unless there's anything else you want to, we've pretty much talked out. We're managing them on the fly, in particular Pickett, Jackson, Rivers, Jordan. Is there anything else to add to that? Or?
Not really, just to it really comes down to what Bin Man's been talking about, the loading versus resting scenario.
Do you think it's the right strategy?
As Bin Man said, this is a gamble. Whether it's the right one or not, we will find out probably over the next month and certainly into the finals series. I don't know because I'm no sports scientist. The Bulldogs have obviously adopted a very, very different approach. I can't find the stat, but one of the commentators in the Fremantle game on the weekend said that Fremantle had used 39 players, which was only beaten by the Bulldogs.
The Bulldogs were 39 too.
Yeah, okay. So, they're resting players and really the depth of their player list is extraordinary at the moment because they're not bringing in people who are really truly second rate or people who would only ever be playing in the VFL. They're bringing in quality players. And remember, in this game alone, for example, they were missing Easton Wood, Dunkley, Treloar, and their fullback was injured. Alex Keith was injured after about 2.5 minutes in this game. So,
and Wallace can't get a game at the moment, and he normally does this.
Yeah. They're missing a lot of talent out of that side, but their ability to bring in that coverage of talent has just been extraordinary. And in the year in 2016 when they won the premiership, if you recall, they had a horrible injury list. But they still won the premiership. They just seem to be able to bring players in who played their role, did what they needed to do. From our perspective, it's a different sort of thing. I suspect we might have to rest Jackson this week. He's had 3 kicks in the last 2 weeks. He really, really looks more tired to me than Rivers or a James Jordan. My personal opinion is, and we'll talk about changes coming up this week. We've got a Wiedemann or a Majak Dor who can fill in quite easily. I think Dor would be perfect to come in for one game. And we'll talk about this later on. But I think Jackson really needs a break, and I think he's also the youngest out of that group. Am I right or not? Is he? Yeah. Is he 20? Yeah. It's not surprising. Rivers has been around a bit longer, and Jordan has, even though he was injured for the majority of last year. Pickett seems to be holding up quite well from that group, but he plays a different style of game to a rucking game. When you're playing in the ruck, you get beaten every single week, and more important, and you have to run a lot. Yeah, you're running the length of the ground. So, I think we can still have the reduced loading, but I suspect Jackson's actually fallen below the line. To be useful on the ground, but here's an opportunity, I think, just to bring in someone for a game, probably only one game because you don't want to be changing too much. But give the guy a break. His talent is extraordinary. Let's not burn it out at the wrong end of the season.
It's crazy to think those players you just mentioned, George, are only in their second season, aren't they? So they're all kids. They're all babies. Yeah. I don't think they will. I mean, the time was when I was talking about the bye. That seemed to be the logical time. So, it starts to be problematical changing the side now. This is the time you really want your best. Your 22 that's going to be taking you into the finals, you want to be playing from this round on. So, I take your point. That's a really good way of saying it. Is drop below the line between the benefit, and I think that's probably true. But I just can't see them sort of changing tack. I think that it's part of Goody's philosophy. I think it's part of the idea of this system will take us there. I think it's also part of the way he manages players and the relationship about, like if he said to Jackson, you can expect your form to drop off, but don't worry. We're not judging on those numbers. You just do your role. Don't worry about the numbers. Don't worry about the talk and the fans and the media. Trust Burgess will get you fresh. I just don't think they'll make any changes other than maybe form-related, maybe Harms out and Melksham in. I think they'll stick with his list despite your excellent point there, George, about that's his third game. He's on a downward trajectory in terms of form, isn't it? It's like he had a terrible game last week, and it was even worse this week.
Yeah.
Just been doing on the fly my ladder prediction. We all know how well.
No.
We all
this
know.
Was banned.
Yeah, no, we all know how well that went last time we did this in the mid-year review. But it's pretty simple. We've got 4 games to go. We've got, I think, 2, well, you would say winnable games, but with Melbourne, it's actually the opposite. We've got Gold Coast and Adelaide. Now, we don't even know where we're going to be playing the Gold Coast at the moment.
Could be in the Northern Territory.
Could be. I heard someone on Demonland say that the Northern Territory is opening up to Victoria. I don't know if that's true. Yep, okay.
That is correct, yes.
So that might allow us to play there. I think that's the worst possible outcome for us, given that we have to go to Perth the next week after playing in Darwin. So that's really, really bad. We'd prefer
Alice
to play.
Springs would be nice.
Well, that's not going to happen. It's going to be Darwin. Would prefer to play them, I guess, at Metricon if we have to go anywhere. We'll talk about Gold Coast match in a minute, but it's quite simple. If we win 3 out of the 4, we'll probably end up third or fourth. But if we only win 2, by my calculation, and I've done the other games based on who's higher on the ladder, we could finish 5th or 6th, and I've got us finishing 6th. Now, that might not be 6th. We probably play the Eagles in Melbourne. But then if Bulldogs and Geelong win their first games, our next game is going to be either against Brisbane, Sydney, or Port. Now, presumably Sydney will not be playing in Sydney, so I wonder where that possible match would. Where would Sydney play a home game? Would they go in Queensland?
Queensland, I'd suspect.
Yeah. So it's there you go. That's the worry. That second week of finals, if we don't finish in the top 4, is where I'm very worried about.
Absolutely.
Having to play a Brisbane or a Port in, even though we did beat Port a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, you've got to finish top 4. Again, looking at history, and I think that, as I've talked about different times, I'm a punter, and punter's all about, horse punting is all about form and history, and, there's a lot of store put on in the same looking back in history and what's happened. And we don't seem to do that in footy when we're thinking about, about performance and things like that. So, top 4, the only team to win outside of the top 4 is the Dogs, and it keeps on getting thrown up like it was proof that it can happen. It's a statistical outlier, and it's the exception, the classic exception that proves a rule. When a lot went right for them that season, you mentioned injuries, Andy or John, I can't remember but actually they were pretty fit. They had their best 22 come final, so that was lucky. But that was part of that was that from memory, that was the first year they had the pre-finals bye, which would have thrown all the clubs out in terms of their planning, and definitely takes an advantage away from finishing top 2. That's a huge factor that's changed significantly the run into the finals. So it makes it more possible, but still statistically, you don't win from outside top four. I'm really confident that, that we will get on our bike, and super confident this week. Although I noticed on Demonland, it's 3 days and 21 minutes. You've got metric on Andy, it says on Demonland, but we still don't know where it's going to be.
Well, that was just that's where it probably was going to be prior to us knowing we're coming out of lockdown, and I wasn't sure about Darwin.
So, I think we'll win all 3 games and potentially lose against Geelong. That's how I see the rest of the season going, which will be not great to lose coming into the finals. But, I'm really confident, actually. And I'm, having said all that, this game suddenly is huge, isn't it? This game on the weekend, I can't wait for it. It's a genuinely super important game, a huge amount riding on it, everything I've been banging on about. If we lose this week, well, then, we basically have to win the next 3, including the Geelong game, to wrap up top 4. So, we're coming down to the pointy end of the season.
If we win 3, and I've crunched the numbers, if we win 3, we most likely end up 3rd on the ladder, and that's presuming, I think, Geelong and Bulldogs win all of their games, and depending on whether Geelong improve their percentage, or they're 6% behind Western Bulldogs, we could play Geelong 2 weeks in a row. That's if we win 3 games, lose to Geelong. We could play them 2 weeks in a row.
And if we do, I'm so looking forward to we have to play the final at Cardinia Park discussion.
Well, that won't happen.
Well,
only
it won't happen. The conversation will.
It might, though.
Scott will whinge about it, or bloody.
No, hear me out. If there are no crowds, they will get that game. That I'm saying that now. If there are no crowds, even if there's only 15,000, they might get a game at Cardinia Park because of that.
Oh,
if there are only 40,000, that game could be played at Geelong.
Only if they finish above us.
Yeah, I'm saying, it's likely, unless we beat them in that last game, that game, they'll be the home team. And I'm saying if there's only 40,000 allowed, or 30,000, which is likely, given everyone's nervous about large crowds gathering, particularly after the outbreaks from the footy and the rugby. I wouldn't be surprised if that argument gets thrown up, and because of the crowd numbers, that they get that concession. No one's happy about that. No D supporter's going to be happy about that.
I'm blanking that whole. I can't deal with. I'm progressive, hating the Cats more and more, and I can't stand Scott's bloody discussion about going to shorter quarters. Give me a spell.
But you can see that that's a likely outcome if the crowd numbers don't.
I've got a much more positive spin, as you might imagine, Andy. I can see it's going to be like 2018 all over again. We're going to play them at the G, maybe not in front of 100,000 people, but let's say 40,000 of us vaccinated crew there, and we're going to pants them again. What's that? Is it? It's a first semi? What's the first, a qualifying final?
Yeah, I don't know what they call it, a qualifying final, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to run over the top of them, and Dad's Army's going to be struggling back down the highway to lick their wounds.
Well, let's hope. Go, George.
I was just going to say, the last time you tried a ladder predictors, Andy, it was all out the window the following week, and I don't think it's
that was
it's
eight.
Not just because
that was 8 or 9 weeks out, and there were so many permutations. There's a little bit less room for error when you look at who's Geelong play. They're going to win all their games, but I mean, barring an upset.
Well, that's the problem at the moment. We talked about it just before. At this time of year, this is when the upsets occur. All of a sudden, you've got a whole series of players playing for their life, effectively, and you've got players who are fatigued. And we've already seen, even in the last couple of weeks, some very unexpected results. We look at the West Coast, for example. They just fell in against the Saints on the weekend. they are not playing good football, although they've got a couple of players coming back. Although Liam Ryan looks like he's out for the next couple of weeks with a hamstring or something like that. But that West Coast is suddenly a winnable game for us that it probably wasn't before, because we thought we're going to have to go over to Western Australia after travelling. The Suns for example, this week they led Brisbane by 27 points in the first quarter. Yeah. And then they allowed Brisbane to kick the next 11 goals to blow the game away. The results are moving back and forth quite consistently. So just because someone's above someone else on the ladder, I don't think at the moment guarantees any sort of thing. And Goodwin's has alluded to this all along. We've found it out ourselves. On a day, at the moment, any team can beat any other team. So, yeah, I think it's
usually
it's any team can beat us.
Yeah, well,
a bit riding on where this game is actually, because I mean, it's just insane, isn't it, that we're 3 and a bit days out from the game and we don't know where it's going to be. But surely, to goodness, it can't be in Darwin. If it is, then that's a really bad result for us, because for much the same reason we're talking about the impact of the wet weather, they're actually an excellent kicking team, Suns. And if they do, they were great in that first half, George, against the Lions, and that was on the back of super accurate kicking. I mean, Lukosius is just about the best kick in the AFL, I reckon. He's
absolutely agree with you on that one, yeah.
He's fantastic. He kicks off one step, 60 metres, no problem. If it's wet up there, they're better kicking than us, will be an advantage to them. It'll give the guys horror, feelings about Cairns, the sweaty, slippery, it's a shitty long plane ride. That's a bad result for us. I hope it's at Metricon, and good weather. We need it. We need a good dry day. So a bit's riding on that where it is. All things being equal, I'm really confident. They collapsed in that second half, George, against Lions. They just got run over the top of, and so they're a young team who, the team's not finishing 8. All that talk about loading and stuff. Well, they're not. They probably do that a bit earlier and maybe not go hard. They haven't got finals to prepare for. So, but they've got a pretty young list. And just on that point is last year. It's worth keeping in mind that Port and Lions, they were barnstorming through that season, weren't they? Port were the dominant team all season. Port finished first easily, 4 wins, I think, though 4 losses. Lions finished second. Neither team made the grand final. So, I think that peaking too early issue is something that we're not having to worry about. So that's a positive. But, Suns I've been actually pretty impressed. I'm pleased the Suns haven't fallen away, because the AFL needs the Suns up and about and to be a strong footy team, I think. And, they've got some really good players. It's good to see Rao back. They've got the talent. So, exactly as I say, George, if we don't bring everything we need to bring, then for sure they're a chance of going to beat us. But I'm really confident we'll bring that, and that we're going to start on that upswing fitness wise.
George, anything else you want to add about the game?
The Suns game, is that the?
Yep.
Yeah. I think this is exactly the right sort of game for us at this time of year. As I said, the Suns are they're feeling the heat of the season themselves. Rowell and Tuke Miller were just superb in this game. Even at the end, although Brisbane rolled them from about the first quarter to close towards the end. Rowell and Miller were still going strong. It was the rest of the side that just let them down badly. Particularly their structures just completely fell apart. So we've got structure which will benefit us. The other big important thing, and this is why we've got to look at who does the rucking this week. I think Max is very tired. The fortunate thing for us is that their only rucker that they've got at the moment, and they rucked him in the Brisbane game, was Burgess. His grand total of 191 centimetres. So he just couldn't take the load. And McInerney from Brisbane was just taking the ball out of the air all the time in the ruck contest and just doing what he pleased. Here's a big opportunity for us to really cement the relationship between the rucks and the mids. Rail's going to be fantastic. He'll get the ball, but we've got to be able to practice shutting down those one or two players that they do have in the middle that are really damaging. I think we've got a far better. Our back line will be far more solid. They don't have a great number of forwards outside King. King is first class, like his brother. But we've got the players to exactly match them up. But this is the game that we're able to start to come back on track. It's just come at the right time for us. I don't know that we would have needed to have been backing up a game at the moment against someone like a Geelong after playing the Bulldogs, but this is the perfect one for us, particularly as Binman said, if it's played up at Metricon in good conditions, it will suit us. So, yeah, we need to see that things are returning to normal in this particular game.
Yeah, spot on, George. And look, I know that I can sort of, I guess, fall on the positive side of the ledger, but I'm really confident of this game, and I can see us doing a similar job on them as Lions did, because we'll see early on if we are running in waves and we have got that swarm, then it'll be evident right from the get-go, and we'll know 5 minutes, 10 minutes in if we've got run in the legs, and if we do, I think we'll run well over the top of them. Again, if you look at history, these are the games where a team that's struggling into the end of the season, like the Suns are, as I said, they've done better. They could have easily fallen away. So I've been really impressed that the Suns have been able to not do that and get a couple of good wins in the journey. But historically, this is where teams who are not making finals start to think about their mid-season, at the end of season break, and the last few games for them are a challenge. We're coming into the finals. It will be up and about. You've got something to focus on as a team. So I can really see us getting on top, and that would be really good fill-up for fans and the team for that to happen. The other thing, George, and I'd really love to see dry conditions and Brown have a really good crack at it, because I thought he was fantastic actually on the weekend. He's kicking aside. Thought his effort was great. Tricky condition for a big fella like him.
Still took some nice marks, even given the conditions.
Still took some nice marks. And, exactly as George said when he was sort of talking about the importance of a Brown coming back in a few weeks back, is that he provides a contest. He draws players to him. I think that I just really hope he gets some dry conditions to strut his stuff and kick some goals. And, it's weird his Shanks kick, but he got it going in the end, didn't he, with his accurate kicking?
Didn't really touch on changes much. Talked about Jackson maybe having a rest. Anyone you can see coming in?
It's a problem for them, the VFL, isn't it? It's good that they're getting a game this week. Yeah. I just checked on KO.
They're playing the Bulldogs.
I can't see whether it's on. I think it might be on Channel 7. But that's been a problem for them. So I don't think they'll make changes. Harms didn't. He's had 3 poor games in a row. So if there was a player to come out on form, it would be him. But again, looking at sort of form, Goody doesn't make changes, does he? So, I thought you made a point earlier, George, about the presser, post-game presser by Goodwin, and I thought it was really interesting. His tone was, really quite confident, and that was echoed by Hunt. I'm not sure if either of you guys listened to the Hunt interview post-game. Obviously the messaging to the players was, and Gawn was repeating similar themes this morning on the radio, apparently, that it's okay. We've got this where, there's nothing to panic about. We're heading in the direction that we're wanting to head. So I thought he was really measured, and just his sort of confidence gave me confidence, I have to say.
Sorry, Andy.
No, you go ahead, George. I'm just looking something up.
Yeah, okay. I think Jackson will need to be rested. Like I said, even just for the one game, I think it's sufficient to bring in someone like Dorr just to say, you've got one game, go out and do it, throw your weight around, be spectacular, but there's no guarantees you're going to get a game the following week. So I don't think I don't think we've got much to gain by taking Jackson out. But that's just a matter of opinion. Harms, I think, is an essential out. He was brought in to do a job last week and didn't do it. He's got very limited football capabilities. It's not 2018 anymore. That was 3 years ago. There's an opportunity once again to Sparrow must have splinters completely in his bum from sitting on the bench all the time. You've got to give these guys an opportunity, and if not Sparrow, apparently Jones is back and available this week. Here's an opportunity to fill in a game or two. I don't think you're changing the structure all that much. Even bring Sparrow on and put Jones in the medical sub or something along those lines. Even put Jackson in the medical sub if you like. But outside that, I can't see any changes. It's time for these players to show what they've got. You don't want to be making too many changes.
That's I could see that actually, or even Harms going to the medical sub and Captain Jack coming into the team, because it's interesting because he's been a medical sub. I don't know, I'd be guessing, but probably half the season, don't you reckon? Barrow. And it sort of again speaks to the approach, the philosophy that Goodwin's taken into even the medical sub hasn't been swapped too often. I could see Jones getting a run. I think Jones, Harms, Captain Jack, those three are relatively interchangeable. The question on Harms is, as you say, George, is that if he's not got a job and doing that job super well, then he's not up to the sort of elite level midfield of like the Dogs, for instance, or it means that we've dropped down in our midfield a bit.
Yeah, and tellingly again from the Goodwin presser, he was asked that direct question about tagging Libba, and Goodwin said even...
Sorry, guys. YouTube auto played then.
Goodwin said he was taken off at three-quarter time, so he's well aware of what he had to do during the game with Harms, so I don't think Harms has got a good chance of being in the team this week. The other thing which I think is really critical in this game is the need to bring in Sparrow, because that way, for Binman's benefit, we'll have a Swallow and a Sparrow on the ground at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll watch with interest. Swallow. He's I think that it's interesting looking back. 2018 is going to tell us a bit about, we got on a roll late season. And it's a weird thing that happens with looking at each season in isolation. But if you look at 2000, even back to 2017, but 2018 as a part of the continuum of this journey, we really got going at the end of that season. But remember, we lost late to Swans in that season as well, didn't we? So that was probably around 19 or something. But after that, we come finals, we were really there. And from memory, I can't remember how many games Spargo had played in the lead up. Can you guys remember? But my memory seems to be that he came in fairly late in the season and played a great final series. And Wiedemann might have even been the same. So I don't think Goodwin would be shy to bring in someone like Captain Jack. I can't see someone like Bowie or someone who hasn't played senior footy come in. That would seem not part of the of Goodwin's template. But I can see Melksham coming back in 100%. So someone's got to come out if Melksham comes in.
Spargo actually played 18 games that year.
Right, my memory's way off on that one,
including the three finals he played. Came in round 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, was out, and then came back 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and the three finals. So, only missed 5 games plus 4, 13, 14, 15. Yeah, so 3 games. So 8 all up he missed for the year. So pretty much played the full year.
Mm-hmm.
Wiedemann is another story. Not sure.
So, yeah, I mean, it'd be... it's getting crazy how late in the day it is for a decision about where this game is going to be played. I guess if you ask the club, they'd give you some cliche about we're planning for whatever or we're anywhere, anytime, but it must be frustrating for them as well. Well, obviously.
Wiedemann only played, he played round 5, 6, 7, 8, played round 15 and then 22, 23 in the final. So he came back.
I got half of it sort of right.
Yeah. Anything else, boys, besides not knowing where we're actually playing? I think it's extremely frustrating.
Just one more thing from me, Andy, on the various bits of stats. This is one stat I liked. It was on evidence. This was, again, sort of highlighting the slump that Melbourne's in and that every other team is in, by the way, too. That's the only 2 players on our list that have gone up in the championship or champion data player ranking in the last 6 weeks is Hunt and Nibbler. And you'll note that Nibbler was top 4 in our top 4 players for the game on the weekend.
His disposal, though, was terrible.
Say again?
His disposal was terrible, I thought, on the weekend.
But his running was there. He was one of the few players running across the ground, and I thought his pressure was fantastic. But I thought that was interesting because that sort of it was pleasing in one respect because my eye tells me Hunt has really played well in the last little bit.
He has. This week too. He was very good this week.
Yeah, and as I said, last week and this week, those 2 players are the only ones providing any overlap run at the moment. There's no run coming from behind the ball at all practically at the moment apart from those 2 players. So, once we get 4 or 5 players providing that will be a whole different proposition. But I think it's fantastic. It also shows that, they're 24, 25, maybe older. How old's Hunt? He's probably 26 or something, isn't he? So, that it just shows the challenge for those younger players. They've had 7, 8 pre-seasons and, to get where they are, both good runners. But it's really pleasing to see Hunt sort of getting back to the level. Well, he's been really terrific this year, but it's great that he's improved in this last 6 weeks.
26 years of age from April. There was another stat that I just saw this evening from Sir Swamp Thing on Twitter. He said the most experienced player in the round 19 Melbourne Western Bulldogs match was Tom McDonald, 180, playing his 188th game. The most experienced player in a top-of-the-table clash since 1994's round 11 Melbourne versus West Coast. It was Brett Lovett playing his 170th game. So he was the least experienced, most experienced player on the day in a top-of-the-table clash.
And probably the other stat, I wonder if we could get him to, you could probably ask him on Twitter, Andy, I'm not on Twitter, about, the most number of marker of the year contenders marked over the top of a single player. Max Gawn's had 2 already. That mark by Waitman was unbelievable.
It was. Well, he's a real stepladder, Maxie, as evidenced in the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure he's glad that Flying Ryan, as you mentioned, George, has a hamstring injury and might not play against us when we play the Eagles. Because I think he's had a mark of the year contender against Max as well.
It was actually that not only was it a brilliant mark, it was actually a really important time of the game because we were getting a bit of the momentum and, territory was super important. And I can't recall if they scored from that chain, but
he scored not long after from.
He did. That's right. That's right. You're over the back into the contest. You're running into an open goal. Speaking of running into open goals, that's right. So. That's probably also that goal probably speaks to one of our issues that I mentioned before about really not ever replacing Jets with anyone, and that small defender is a weakness, particularly if Hibbert isn't on song. I thought he's really sort of flagged in the last little bit as well.
All right, boys. I think we'll end it there this week. Thank you very much, Big Man, and thank you very much, George, for joining me. And we'll be back next week, hopefully talking about us back on the winners list and improving our top 4 chances. We'll be back next week. Thank you very much for listening, and go Demons.
Come on, Demons. Go Red Legs. Come on.